Welcome, everybody, to the Last Mile Radio with Ryan Leaf. Great show today. Very interesting, very outside my realm, I feel like, but fascinating nonetheless. Tara Trask is one of the country's top jury consultants whose practice focuses on civil litigation with an emphasis on complex commercial litigation, including intellectual property, antitrust, securities, breach of contract, and fraud. She's been doing this for over 25 years. She's been involved in over 600 jury trials in 25 states and U.S. territories. Tara has an extraordinary backstory, being mentored early in her career by Dr. Phil of the TV talk show fame. She has got a couple of sisters, too, that played guitar and sang a little bit. Their names were Marty and Emily. They founded a little group called the Dixie Chicks. You may have heard of them. And she is an accomplished athlete, competing in over 125 triathlons. She accomplished all of this while overcoming drinking and alcohol abuse. Now sober for over 10 years. I love that. Tara is sharing her story and encouraging others to follow a life of service. She has been a guest on the Last Mile and in the Last Mile classrooms, and has been a mentor to the justice-involved community since. Welcome to the show, Tara.
Thanks for having me, Ryan. Good to be here.
I'm excited about this. I love when people find what they need to find and then realize it's to make it about other people.
I mean, that's what recovery is, right?
Yep.
I mean, you know that. That's the whole thing. And I think the only time I ever really get sideways is when I forget that.
Yep. When I start making it all about me, or one of the biggest things is like, why are people being critical of me? You know?
Right.
When they show you the mirror.
Right. Oh, for sure. I mean, you know this, like, doesn't matter how long you have. I'm fortunate to have, I don't even know now. Let's see, I got sober in 2013. Alcohol, drugs also, but you know as well as I do that over time, it becomes a lot less about the substances and a lot more about just dealing with our crazy selves.
Our behaviors.
Right.
Our behaviors.
I mean, just this week, I had a situation where I got one of these like energy healing massages. I didn't know what to expect. The lady says to me she's like, I know you're in recovery, like some stuff might come up tomorrow. And I'm kind of like, I was a little dismissive of it. I was like, okay, whatever. Oh my God, just hit with a ton of bricks, like the whole drop the rock, right? Like everything that I know I cling to still just hit me like a ton of bricks on Monday. And I'm still recovering from it, honestly. Like it's a process.
What was your process on Monday then when that did happen?
I just sort of first of all, recognizing it.
Yeah.
To me, that's
the
like
biggest part.
Big thing to know, like, wait a minute. If I'd had it to do differently, I might have actually even gone to a meeting just to kind of center, because I don't go regularly anymore,
right.
But it's very much,
Grounding.
Recovery's a huge part of my life every day. I just took the day off is what I did. I kind of took the day off. I didn't push too hard, but it is bringing up stuff for me that I'm like, oh, right, we're all up in our BS, and the next step has got to be like, okay, who can I help?
Yep.
Just
how do I take myself out of the equation here?
100%.
And that usually is what does it for me. Doing this show does that for me, really, because this has nothing to do with me. Every time I'm on here, I'm interviewing somebody that has something that they can give back, and your story is so, I feel, wide-ranging because it affects so many different things. The one thing that I was fascinated about was the jury selection part of it, because I've talked about it on the show and how I would consider the criminal justice system to be, or our justice system in particular, just kind of weird. It's just a weird thing, especially if you've never had any interaction with it. And I hadn't. And all of a sudden, it's just like, it's almost make-believe in some ways until all of a sudden the door slams and
right.
You're incarcerated. Speak to how you got involved with it and the evolution, or maybe the lack of evolution because it's been so stuck in its ways for so long. because people hold it up to this light of like it's our famed justice system, and it's the only fair thing that we really have going for us.
So I fell into my work with juries on accident. I got out of school. I owed my dad some money. I moved home to Dallas. He was like, you need to get a job and pay me. And I actually took a job at a company called Courtroom Sciences, and I was answering the phone. And that was Dr. Phil's trial consulting firm. And I was there for 10 years. So that was a complete accident. But I will say this about the justice system, and it's been the last mile and my work, not just with the last mile, but with other folks involved with the last mile that have helped me really understand there's a couple different justice systems in this country, okay? Because the one I work in, which is the civil system, it works great because it's got a lot of moneyed interest in it. And those jurors even, they get lunch paid for, all this stuff because the parties are willing to chip in and do that. And so I'm very fortunate that the justice system that I'm involved in, which is the civil justice system, big patent cases. I mean, I've been involved in cases over the last 3 or 4 years to the tune of billions of dollars. So that's just a whole different place than the justice system that I know exists for so many people in this country. And so it's a little difficult for me because the fundamental principles of what our system is supposed to be,
right,
I believe in those wholeheartedly, right? I mean, the 7th Amendment is right to trial by jury in a civil case. 6th Amendment is right to trial by jury in a criminal case. Like, those are important rights. And especially participating in that system is really important. I have friends call me all the time, I got called for jury duty. How do I get out of this? I'm like, you're not going to get out of it. You're going to go down there. You're going to hold your right hand up, and you are going to swear to tell the truth. And you're going to hope you get on that jury because we need more people to be on juries. That would be a good thing. The system, if it worked right, would be better for everybody. That's been a huge takeaway that I've gotten from it. But, and I can't help it. I do believe in the principles in the Constitution. I really do. It's just unfortunate.
I found that to be more the sense of when I'm speaking with people who work in and around law. It just is the mystery around it, and this was always fascinating to me around jury selection and everything like that. There's somewhat of a mystery around our criminal justice system and our civil justice system on how it goes. The jury selection process. We've all received our jury summons in the mail, and our first reaction usually is, "How do I get out of this?" Why should we view this differently? You kind of spoke to it just a minute ago.
Well, it's really interesting because I watch jurors come in all the time, right? They come into the courthouse and you can tell they're bummed. They don't want to be there. They're frustrated. They're irritated. And then depending on the judge, and I know there's different judges all around the country that do this differently, they tend to do like a little overview. It's almost like an 11th grade reminder. Like, this is why we have a jury system. There's a judge in Texas, I'm in his court all the time, and he goes back to the Magna Carta, right? He talks about the tyrannical kings that we overcame to, found the country and all that kind of stuff. But I watch the jury, and they will literally, you can just sort of watch them settle down and go, oh, right. The other thing that judge says is that he believes that jury service is the second highest form of public service, second only to that of our young men and women fighting in our military, which is true. I mean, we're not asked to do a whole lot in this country, frankly. We got to pay taxes and we got to show up for jury duty. It's kind of it. And if everybody did it, instead of walking in there and being like, oh, I've got a meeting or I can't do, instead of doing that, we'd have better juries. We'd have more representative juries, which is a huge problem, particularly in the criminal justice system, where you do not have representative juries. You got a whole white jury deciding the fate of a black defendant. It happens all the time. We see it in civil cases, even. So it's far from fair, but I think there's a lot of different ways to fix that. One way that would help a lot is for all of us as people. When people say to me, oh, government, we don't have a voice. And I'm like, well, did you answer your jury summons? Because what did you think that was? That is an opportunity to have a voice in what happens in your community.
The optics of what people have in terms of what they want to see, we had my former warden on the show recently, and he talked about how one of his incarcerated individuals come up to him during the question and answer thing and say to him, like, you don't have any programs, you don't have any of these things. And then the warden proceeded to rattle off all these programs and all these things. And he's like, I've never knew that. And what his response was, well, I have to be better then of making you aware of it. And to hear more and more about it. The how and the why, you talked about, it was kind of out of the blue. You go start working in Texas because your dad says you need to pay me. Get involved in that business as a jury consultant. It's unique. It's a specialized and not common career path. How did that ultimately evolve to that? And then the relationship with Dr. Phil?
So it was funny. So he ran the firm. There I am on the front desk answering the phone for like 2 weeks, and all I hear is this like kind of, and he's scary. And I'm still friends with him, and he's started his own media company now. And I went to the opening. I just happened to be in Texas, and I was able to go to the opening. Got to see him. I hadn't seen him in a few years. And he's always been a great champion of mine. We don't agree on a lot of things, but he's always been really straight up with me, and as far and away it took me many years to realize how fortunate I was to have somebody who was a successful business owner like him, and also somebody who's just absolutely brilliant as my mentor. Such a blessing. I did not fully appreciate that until I got a lot older. I was young. I had an opportunity. I had a job. I was just working away. I'm on the front desk. I'm answering the phone. I just had a couple of opportunities that came up that allowed me to kind of move ahead in that company. That I won't belabor the story, but basically I just raised my hand. Yeah. I just kind of kept on raising my hand. Oh, you don't have somebody to do those statistics? I just got out of I can do it. Which is a lot of the things I teach my kids. You're talking about, just you've got to be ready for the opportunities that come your way. And then do you know how to do that? I'll figure it out. That's kind of
this generation is so fearful of doing that. It's like, hand it to me pre-made and I'll use it, rather than, why don't you teach me how to make it, and then I'll teach other people, or I'll make a bunch of them. And it's so you go through this business, you raise your hand, you do the things you do. What's the first real life moment where you're in this process of a big time selection process of finding the right jury, of trying to build a case to win?
It's hard to say when the first time was, because it was so long ago. It's hard for me to remember. But it was, what we do is also, it's very difficult to explain. And because and it's very funny, guys, I got this from Phil. Phil would, when somebody would say jury picker, jury consultant, he hated that. I don't care for it. I'm a trial consultant. So I sat through 9 jury trials in 2024. 9. 7 of those were patent cases. I can almost assure you that other than maybe a couple graphics folks, there is nobody in this country that sat through 7 patent trials last year. Like, that's a niche within a niche. And so what we do is not just jury selection, which is a big part of it. To me, that's just very observational. It's also data driven. We do focus groups, we do mock trials. All that data goes into who we know we don't want on a jury, which is all jury selection is. Jury selection is just who you're deselecting. You don't get to actually pick who gets on. But a trial is a production at the end of the day. It's a story. It's a production.
Who tells the best story?
Who tells the best story, and how do they tell it? Testifying effectively is a skill you can learn. And it's a skill that requires learning. You can't just go in and testify effectively without being taught what the elements of effective testimony are. You also can't do well unless you've actually practiced what the elements of effectively testifying are. So there's just so much to it. And I just loved it. I do think my upbringing and kind of my childhood and just being like kind of the hypervigilance and things that came from having a little bit of a rough time really helped me because I don't miss much. And in that environment where we're basically playing, three-dimensional chess, especially now having, I'm over the shoulder of my lawyer, like, argue it this way. Why don't you make this motion? Like, I'm involved in every aspect of right down to in and out of the room all day in a settlement with a big telecom a few weeks ago, right? Like, so it's just, I'm a consigliere.
Yeah.
That's really what I am.
It's fascinating to see that in what you would normally see, especially depicted on films and everything, a male-dominated business, and for you to have that in Texas, all of the stuff like that. How has that been informed, in terms of navigating and understanding and maybe emboldening you a little bit when it's all said and done? Because it sounds like it from the way you talk to me about what this last year has been like and how you get the opportunity to have real substantive points to everything. That's got to be pretty gratifying for what you've been through.
It's awesome, right? Like, I had no idea that my life would turn out like this. I had no idea. And, or that I would have a vocation. Like, I'm so lucky that I get to actually do something that I really like. I think one of the things over time I've really come to realize that I really like about my job is that I'm able to help people. I mean, even in a civil case, a lot of times I'm able to help people who may be going through maybe not the worst thing, but maybe one of the more challenging things, right? Like, maybe they have this patent and maybe they've had it for 20 years and they're trying to assert it against these big companies they think are infringing on their technology. Being able to help that person get through testifying, for example, and feeling good about, like, I had one woman tell me one time, a witness that I prepped, she was like, I think about myself differently now after working with you. And it was like, wow, okay, this is cool. And that's when I realized, I'm like, I actually have skills myself that can help people through, and being able, and that's what really comes with 25 years of experience in something where it's like, no, I can add real value here. Like, I can really help this little company or these people or this person. And I do find that gratifying. And it's weird because it's this weird little, not very many people need my help. The people who do really do. And that's fun.
The impact you can have. We're going to take a little break, but when we come back, we're going to dive into how your recovery has helped that aspect of things, because it's given me a different perspective completely in terms of how I can go about and be an effective and gratifying person in the workforce. When we come back here on The Last Mile Radio with Ryan Leaf. Welcome back, everybody, to The Last Mile Radio with Ryan Leaf. I'm here with Tara Trask. Fascinating story. We dove into the understanding of what the job was, but there was something that I kind of wanted to revisit because it's important. Like, you have an effect on a business that a lot of people don't know about or understand, but you're also a woman doing it, and it's dominated mostly by men through this process. Yeah.
I mean, I used to joke when I first started working in Texas that I know how to speak good old boy, which I do. And I mean, a little, and it's funny because there's a photograph that was taken of me after a win in East Texas, and I'm the only woman in the picture. And that, I didn't realize that, and it didn't occur to me until somebody pointed it out to me. I was interviewed for a story, and somebody saw the picture and said, oh my gosh, you're the only one. And this was like years after the fact. And it's something I've said to Phil as well. I'm like, it just never occurred to me that I was a girl. And I mean, there's a reason for that. I don't really say this big publicly because it's been challenging to do that. But I mean, I have my entire life, I have been what you would consider to be a non-binary person. Mm-hmm. My gender identity is not female. It is some mix of the two. And that has been true of me my whole life. I just don't have any words for it, right? I'm 54. I'm 54. I went to the library when I was in college trying to figure out what I was. And all I could find was lesbian. I'm like, well, I like dudes, so that's a problem. Okay, so then I just gave it up.
That math ain't mathin'.
And so I don't love the words around it. Nobody has to worry about my pronouns or anything. But at the same time, I do identify with that community, and I do, and I also feel like it has really helped me in the business world because, I mean, truthfully, women are a much bigger mystery to me than men are.
I think you walk into that understanding of like. And it just blows my mind sometimes where people want to fight over things that don't necessarily belong to you. I'm like, does this make them happy? Does it make them feel more comfortable in their workspace to know that when I looked at a picture of myself in the job I do really well, I didn't go, something was out of the ordinary here. Rather than I was really good at my job, working with peers that were really good at their job, and we won.
Right. And I look back now, I mean, as I've gotten older, and some of it's also being single and just not feeling any of the pressure of having, on anybody that I have to sort of perform for. And so I feel like I kind of present and live my life in a way that's a lot more authentic to me. And what's interesting, too, is I've gotten to a place in my career, it doesn't matter. Like, I walk into federal court, I mean, I'm not going to be wearing my dangly earrings. I'm going to have on a suit. But, like, I walk into federal court with hair, just like this, right? I've earned that too, in fairness. But in terms of like how people treat those, I heard somebody say the other day, and I thought this was great. Somebody was like, well, what are all these pronouns and all this trans stuff? He's like, and this was a gay man. He was like, look, I don't pretend to understand any of that. But the bottom line is when I go to somebody's house and they ask me to take off my shoes, I just take off my shoes, It's like, right, can't we just do that? I don't understand.
It's just fear.
Yeah.
It's fear what you don't know.
Yeah.
And when you don't know something or it seems odd to you, your general reaction to most people I've ever met has been that of defensiveness and protection of something that they don't own. And so, listen, I had this argument years and years ago when they were legalizing gay marriage. And people talking about how... I even fought with my mother about it. And I was just like, why do you care about what someone else's happiness is about? I just don't, I've never understood it. And so I've been non-judgmental about it. I don't know what that, I'm probably less educated than most people about it too, but I figure if I just look at someone else and go, are you happy about this? Does this make you happy? Does this make you want to get up the next morning and be a better version of yourself? I'm okay with it. That's all I feel like I can do in it.
Yeah. The only reason I've decided, because I first really kind of recognized this with the language in 2020, I would say. I had an incident with a friend, said some stuff, and I was like, anyway, but I decided I needed to sit with it for a while to see if like, is it right? I don't know. And then I kind of went back over my whole life. I almost wrote a book about it. I mean, I really did kind of write a book about it, like on these stickies on my wall. But then I was like, God, I don't want to talk about that all day long every day. That's the downside to that, to being that public about it. But at the same time, with everything that's happening in the country and how badly trans people are being the 22 states have banned gender affirming care. Like, that's crazy. And this is this teeny tiny population of people who have absolutely no political power whatsoever.
I asked this question to my wife the other night when they were talking about the San Jose State volleyball team, and I wanted to ask the question. I'm like, is this like a rapid problem in the eyes of a lot of people going on everywhere? Like, is it like everywhere you look, is there a trans person trying to play women's sports? My wife had a question though, and I don't know if this would be something that would offend, but is it a large enough group where you could actually have like a league of its own?
So I just heard the head of NCAA. I just saw a clip of him testifying on this topic.
Yeah.
Because he was actually talking about the women basketball players. But what he said was, he was asked, how many trans athletes are there in the NCAA? There are less than 10.
Okay.
And there are about 500,000, 400 something or 500 something thousand.
Athletes, yeah.
Right. But what his point was, after he made that point, which I thought was compelling, And then he said, what I really wish people would worry about with regard to women's sports is the abuse that our athletes are taking, because what comes at those women basketball players, he was like, we just know what comes to their handles. We don't know what comes to their DMs, and what comes to their handles is horrifying. Could we please worry? If we're worried about women's sports, which I think that's fine to be worried about, but 2 or 3 athletes, it's just a distraction.
Well, that was my question. I'm like, it's is this the thing that we should be focusing on? And it's a way to distract from that other side of things. I mean, this conversation is fascinating, and I'm pretty sure that most people who are listening to Ryan Leaf, former NFL football player, would never anticipate me having this conversation. But it's it's important and it's valid, and so.
And I do think there's a real conversation that needs to be had around trans athletes. That's a real conversation that needs to be had, and I think the trans community needs to be willing to have that conversation in a way that it maybe hasn't in the past. But in terms of just trans folks, that's a place where it's like, could you just leave them alone? Just leave them alone.
Would you have, this is a good question around that idea that kind of my wife and I were talking about, was, if someone suggested, hey, you have trans swimmers, if there was a league of their own, in a sense, would that be an offense to them as a segregation?
That's hard for me. I can't speak for all trans people, obviously, but at the same time, I think the problem with it is it's such a tiny community.
There's no need for it.
Right.
Yeah.
At the same time, I totally recognize, I just want to be really clear, like I do recognize that there has to be a conversation. It's probably sport by sport.
Yep. And that's what we both said.
I think that's really the way that it has to be dealt with. The other thing that's interesting is like conversation about trans folks always goes to trans athletes. And it's like, since trans athletes are really not an issue, if you want to deal with it statistically. Because the population
doesn't exist, yeah.
Right. Then why are they being demonized?
Yeah.
370 bills introduced over the last year, anti-trans bills in the United States.
The process, when you watch that stuff play out and understand, and the election was such a big, fear-mongering tactic, the children aspect of things.
Yeah.
For me, you want and understand them to. I had such identity crisis growing up around who I was, because I was I was told I was bad for how I behaved or how competitive I was. I was told I was bad by my community and ultimately by my mom, and it was a shaming aspect of things. So and at that age, I had no idea how I would deal with it. That's my bigger concept with this is the brain development of our youth in protection that they may need. That's probably the only thing that I come up against and go, hey, I would just love to protect our youth until they can make their own decisions, like we usually do when we're 18.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and protecting the lives of our youth in a way that is protective of them.
Yeah.
I mean, that's, yeah, no, I'm with you.
This is, I'm looking back at my boss here a little bit, and he's probably like, I didn't know if I hired this guy to do this. This is awesome. In fact, we're gonna get back to some of this cool stuff here in just a minute. We're gonna take a break and reset her, but that was. I'm going to clip that one for the reel. I know that for sure. We'll be right back right here on Last Mile Radio with Ryan Leaf. Welcome back, everybody, to the Last Mile with Ryan Leaf. I'm here with Tara Trask, and I wanted to dive into your recovery, and because you spoke to it, it's been 10 years. For a lifetime of ours, you're 54, I'm 48. 10 years is not very long. It's a speck of our life. How has that choice, how has that recovery influenced how you do your job now in this type of climate?
Well, I mean, as you know, when you get sober, it changes everything. I didn't know who I was, because my whole identity was I was a party girl. That's it, man. I always had blow in my pocket. You talk about something bad happening. When you show up at a party when you've been sober for a few years and you hear people at the party that you're at saying that they didn't come a couple of years after the last time you were there because you had made the party so crazy and so insane that everybody like hated themselves after the fact. It's like It's a Wonderful Life in reverse.
Yeah.
That happened to me.
They're almost backhanded compliments too, in senses where they're like, "So great to see you where you're at right now. Oh man, I so knew you when you were that asshole."
Yeah,
For
sure.
Well, you don't have to add the second part. You can say, "I'm so happy that you're where you're at."
Yeah.
I don't have to be reminded that I was that asshole.
Yeah. I didn't know who I was, and I found it really discombobulating for a while. Work was probably the one place where I did okay. I mean, the thing that was tricky, in early sobriety, everybody knows this, like, what do? What do you have in your hand? Who's going to ask you what, I mean, like, I'm so far from that, it's hard for me to even remember it a little bit. But I have, in terms of work, the one thing, and the other piece that I really realize now, I don't know if this will resonate with you, but for me, there was part of me, I look back now and I think, I was trying to show the world that I could do all this stuff with one hand tied behind my back. I do think that like there was something in my psyche that was like, yeah, I can do all of this and I've been up for 3 days.
Yeah.
That's the dumbest thing ever. It's definitely going to hold you back from what you're capable of. But the problem is when you stop doing that and you just show up like yourself without anything else and without any excuses and without the, look at me, I'm doing all this. What you do or don't do is 100% on you. And that's sobering, I guess I would say. It's difficult. But over time, what it really does is it just brings you down to earth and you realize I'm just a human being like everybody else. I'm really not better than anybody else. I'm not worse than anybody else. I got that lesson young from my dad. So I intellectually thought that's why I was taught that.
Right.
And I've always treated people the same, but I think inside I always thought that I was different, that I was special somehow.
And then you chemically
I made myself
brain.
that way. Yeah. You're special. Sure, anybody can stay up for 3 days if you're doing, just line after line. That doesn't make you special. It just makes you a drug addict.
Yeah. That's what everybody does.
Right.
When they're in that place. The understanding that you are a flawed human being just like anybody else. That was instrumental in me, and I did the same thing. Like every piece of me told me I should stay in college one more year. I wasn't mature enough. I needed to develop more. But my mind was like, no, you will go to the pros a year early before anybody else thought you would. You'll do all these things. Like it was all this stuff that, and I never really heard it that way, the way you put it. And I thought that was really perfect. I can do all this stuff with my hand tied behind my back too. Yeah. See how much more special I am than everybody else who may be in this field.
And I'm not saying I consciously thought that, but looking back,
yeah,
I know that's what I had in my mind.
Yeah.
Or at least that's what was sort of driving me. And the truth is I was really, my mom passed when I was 10. My dad raised me. And it was very much, I mean, he did a great job in terms of just, he did his best. And I have a huge amount of respect and love for him for what he did, is as much as he improved over the way he basically had no parents. So, but it was still a very performance focused upbringing. I had to do, I had to show, I had to prove all the time. I've not raised my kids that way on purpose because I know that just created a scenario where my worth was completely tied up in my achievements and what I did. I couldn't just be in the room and be worth anything. And I mean, I struggle with that to this day.
I think everybody struggles with that. When, am I good enough? Am I also, listen, okay, you've been taught some other lessons and ones that were outside your purview, right? You watched your sisters go on to have this great success, but then all of a sudden, the world that lifted them up on this pedestal decided we're just going to knock the living hell out of you now too. when you want to speak your mind, you're in a position where you have a platform, and how did that affect you in terms of how you looked at sharing the thoughts that you had and things like that? Because that had to have had a profound effect on you to see it happen on such a massive level.
I mean, I've always been I was a huge Dixie Chicks fan. I'm a huge Chicks fan.
Yep.
I'm just a fan. Literally in the front row with one of my best friends who I actually met because he's a super fan and we've become super close. I will be in the front row to watch my sisters play, which makes my sister Emily kind of nervous. She's like, I just can't look you right in the eye, which is kind of funny. And then the band just kind of like waves at me and stuff. It's fun. But, watching, I don't know, I've just always been really proud of them. I think the thing I've been most fortunate of is that I've always sort of compared myself to myself. I've been very blessed that way. And I think my dad taught me to do that. Like, I don't really look at other people and compare myself that often. I compare myself to myself viciously, and I'm viciously hard on myself. But thankfully, because if I were comparing myself to my sisters, I'm going to lose every day. Like that, they're right. That's just been meteoric, right?
Right. But it's also, it's all it is a perspective.
Yeah.
From somewhere else. Like it's not. What I found is like none of it's real. I have two younger brothers, and I had to imagine growing up in my shadow wasn't fun, but they've both been exactly like you are. I don't think at any time did they ever feel like they compared what they were doing to what I did, and I love that about them. And I don't think for any moment that was probably the case with you. But what can come from it, and what I think did come from my story to my brothers, was they were able to see it from afar and kind of see how the world can bury you too.
For sure.
And your ability to, like, what did you learn from that? What did you carry with that, and how does it help you grow through your process?
I think not so much what happened to them with the incident, as we,
Yeah.
but I mean, because that was in many ways, I was more focused on them personally during that time.
That their safety and their health, yeah.
100%, because, I mean,
listen, people, there's not many people out there that can go and feel like somewhat of a savior. Their rise as a rock and roll band, country band, had a guy from, an athlete from Montana who loved it. Loved it.
Yeah.
And then to see a culture try to destroy them in the next second, I could relate to that because I went to San Diego and I was the savior. And within 2 weeks, I was the biggest pariah because of how I reacted to something in a moment.
Yeah.
So I can relate to that.
Yeah. I mean, it was hard at the time personally to see how difficult it was for them. It was much harder for Natalie. I mean, Natalie lives in California now. She can't live in Texas. There's stations that still won't play them in Texas. Like, it's crazy. And these are the same people, by the way, who are very much against the Iraq and Afghanistan. I mean, that's the other part where you're like, hello, where's the apology? Oh, you're not going to bring the apology after what you did to them? Literally the first cancellation ever.
No, this is the first cancel culture that existed. Yeah.
Right. And it was the conservatives who did it.
People love the cancel culture.
Yeah.
Until they're the canceled ones, right?
I think if I've taken anything from my sister's career, though, is the rise so everybody think, they broke up. No, the Chicks never broke up. Nat just did her own thing. The Chicks did a side project. I love that music. It's called Courtyard Hounds. Go get it. It's all awesome. They put out 2 albums. Some of my favorite. There's a song that was inspired by me on one of them. I love that music. But the rise with the Gaslighter album that they put out in 2020 and they toured, and watching them build an entirely new fan base, not a lot of moms with their kids who had only listened to that music in the back of their minivans for 10 years while the girls were on hiatus. Watching them play just packed at Red Rocks, watching them play at a hockey arena in Vancouver with my bestie in the front row. Like, I was out on the tour a lot. My daughter was working on the tour. And I just couldn't be prouder. And it also taught me a lot about how just keep doing your thing. Just keep doing your thing.
Just breathe.
I'm a bigger fan now of them than I was before. And I would challenge anybody to be able to point to another band who was the biggest selling female act of all time across all genres, even more than the Supremes, who had happened to them what happened to them, and to come back with the fury that they have and the fan base that they have now again. I don't know any other act that's done that. It's amazing.
Well, the question I asked has been thoroughly answered by you, and just if anybody could see you through this microphone, hopefully we'll clip that part of it, because it's amazing when I go out and speak now, and I speak to a group of kids that weren't alive when my shit was my shit. And I ask them the question, how many of you know my story? And they'll raise their hand. And do you know me because of a positive or a negative thing? And just in the last few years, it's been hands would go up for negative, so most of them. And I asked that question to a group of football players the other day, and there was like 26 of them in there. And every single one of them raised their hand, and then I asked them that question, and they said, because of positive thing. Because of me as an analyst now and me as a advocate for mental health and substance use disorder. And that is the truest form. I just kept getting up. Hey, this too shall pass. Life is fucking hard.
Totally.
It's unfair, but someone sold us a bill of goods that life was fair for some reason. It's about how you deal with that matters. And so the lesson that you got and you learned about this is that it's not fair. It's about how you deal with it. And they may have shown their sister the best way to deal with it in a positive, healthy way.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, that is it, right? And that's what sobriety taught me too, right? And then when you add into that, just get over yourself, get out of your own way.
You're not that
important. You're not that whatever. And by the way, nobody's talking about you. Nobody cares about what you're doing.
They have their own problems.
Like, they're doing their own thing.
Yeah. And if they are focusing on you, then it's a projection. And so that's something that you have to vacate immediately.
But bringing that into your, work life, your daily life, that's the tricky part. And I was well sober before I was able to do that, but some other mentors and things that I saw do things that I was like, oh, right, you're wrong. Just say you were wrong. Like, my team is very used to me just being like, sorry guys, that was a shit idea and we're just not going to do that.
Well, people, that's rare. It shouldn't be.
I've been doing it for so long, because that's the other thing I think. I tell my kids this. I'm like, look, just owning it. I think about like my son, he did something wrong. He got in trouble with, just whatever. He was doing some stuff he shouldn't have been doing, and this girl broke up with him because of it. And I said, look, I know you're not going to get her back. He knew that. I said, but you need to go over there and you need to talk to her and you need to apologize and you need to own it. And it's not for her.
No.
It's for you. It'll be good for her to hear it, whether she takes it or not.
It's
I don't
the
know.
amends process. You know that.
You've got to take accountability, and you've got to be willing. I had another mentor, Steve Sussman. He was an attorney in Houston. He was a friend of mine, passed away in 2020. He was an older guy, ran a firm, huge, just larger than life. He would put up an idea for the vote on a partner call, and by the time he heard all of his other partners talk about it, he'd vote against his own idea. Wouldn't even give it a thought. And like literally just not a thought. He had absolutely no ego in those kind of things. He had some ego, but either way, if you can do that, that's everything.
It's everything, and that's happened to me now, especially in things with my wife. Like the control factor of anything. And then when I get more educated in situations, and that's why I love having conversations with people that I don't necessarily walk in the same path with, because I want to just have the most information I can, and ultimately when it's done, if I'm not the one that was right, that's okay.
Yeah, that's
really okay. I would love to talk to you longer. I want to get into the the athlete side of things, like the exercise regimen and everything to run what spurred this for you. And I don't know. I could never put myself through a triathlon. That process. What made you go to that part, and was that part of the sobriety aspect of things?
Yeah, so I started doing triathlons I did my first triathlon when I was 15. I was a swimmer. I was a diver. I was a junior Olympic diver. I was really fortunate. My first diving coach was a 2-time Olympian, world champion. having those kind of people in your life is just so important to have that level of accomplishment to model oneself after. And so I was a swimmer. And so I had a boyfriend who was doing a triathlon, and I said, sure, I'll do it. I still have pictures. It's a hilarious 1985. The sport was invented in like 1982. And I raced for years. I did an Ironman in 2002, and I did Ironman New Zealand. I'd done a couple of half Ironmans, and then well over 100 Olympic races. I've always been an athlete. It's another big part of my identity. And I remain so. Like, I can't run anymore. Had knee surgery a few years ago, but I've always been in the gym, and now I lift pretty heavy, and I don't know. I'm happy. If I'm not athletically motivated, and if I'm not using my body is one of the best things that I have, that I just sort of naturally was given. And my kids are the same way. I tell them all the time, I'm like, you need to really just
thank me,
be appreciative. Yeah. But like, for me, even just this morning, I was like, God, I got to get moving. Like, the older I get, the more important it is. If my body feels good, then I'm good. If my body doesn't feel good, I'm going to be struggling. That is a profound change that's happened to me in my 50s.
Well, I think if most people would understand that.
Yeah.
The depression and the wellness that comes from dealing with what your body's not. I mean, over the last 2 years, we've added a cold plunge to our regiment and a paleo diet where it's no processed food, and like the inflammation in my body doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah. And
that gives you that to that point. You're like your wellness follows on how your body makes you feel.
Well, the other thing I was a little uncertain about, I mean, obviously I'm in menopause. That's a great, cool word, but it's a true thing. We should all probably talk about it more. And things change, right? A little bit when you're in menopause. You just go get your hormone replacement therapy, and then that helps a lot. But I do think I started to wonder if I had limitations to building muscle, limitations to mobility, limitations to flexibility. Nope, I don't. It just takes more. I've put on more muscle in the last year than I have ever put on in my life. I can deadlift more than I ever could in my life. So I'm kind of at a place now where I've had a couple of these benchmarks this year, which comes just from consistency, that have me really kind of excited. I'm like, wow, what can I do? What can I do next? I'll say it on here. Like, I may enter in like a fitness competition or something. Like, it's fun. Yeah. I'm having a good time with it, and it makes a huge difference for my mental health.
It's a huge difference maker. I deadlifted 275 10 times the other day, and I was like, never did that when I played. Yeah. So you're exactly right. You're exactly all those
185 things over here, 185, and I can go more for sure. Yep. I did like 3. I can for sure do it.
I have this young woman who's also a teacher, but she's become our trainer, and because we have the gym at the house, and she does the same thing. She lifts heavy weight, and she just decided recently to start doing some competitions. And so I get that. Before we get out of here, I wanted to kind of ask the question. You can kind of talk to how did you get involved with the Last Mile, and what were your takeaways from that experience?
Well, I've been around the Last Mile since close to the beginning, I would say. I know Chris and Beverly from the neighborhood way back in the day. And I remember Chris said, this was, 2014, I think is around the time good 10 years ago. He said, would you consider coming in and talk to the men? And this was the entrepreneurship program. This was before coding happened. And I remember vividly him introducing me to them. I remember saying to a friend, like, oh, well, I'm not going to just like walk across the yard at San Quentin. And of course, that's exactly what happened.
What you have to do.
I wasn't overly intimidated. Again, I'm a person. Like, I look at anybody incarcerated, and like, these are people. I felt that way when I went in. I just don't think of myself as different than any of the men or women that are incarcerated. Anyway, so I remember when he introduced me, he was like, okay, I told you I was going to bring you something different, right? So I might have been one of the first women. I don't know if I was the first woman to come in, but that was just a really profound experience. Like, I still have friends. Like, I have friends who were in that class who have been paroled, who are working in, the community.
Living their best lives.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've always told Chris and Beverly that, like, what they've done with the last mile is just, I mean, it's incredible. And I know it's touched a lot of lives, and I've always been happy to be a little bit of a part of it, and I get to participate now and then, and but to see the success of what the last mile has accomplished, it's extraordinary.
It is extraordinary. It's pretty profound, and it's something I'm incredibly grateful to get to be a part of too. What hasn't been profound is, unfortunately, the Las Vegas Raiders, which is what I hear your fandom towards at the NFL level.
So I was raised by these rabid Dallas Cowboy fans, right? Because I'm from Texas.
Yep.
And I just hated them. I hated the Cowboys. I hated football. I hated it all. I was a swimmer, right? They got new pads and uniforms every year. I'm swimming in the same Speedo 4 years in a row. It sucked. I was just against football, period. Then I moved out here. I ended up marrying a guy who was a longtime Raider fan, both through his mom, his dad, in the 70s. And Oakland Raiders, his parents are very specific. Oakland Raiders.
Yes.
Okay.
Not Los Angeles, and certainly not Las Vegas.
I sat next to Marcus Allen on a plane one time. That was pretty awesome. But anyway, yeah, like he literally like tapped my shoulder and started chatting with me across the aisle. It was great. But yeah, I don't know. I've bought in whole hog to the Raiders because of the history and the legacy. And if you look back on anything, I mean, Al Davis, complicated character, sure. Also hired the first female GM, the first, the first head coach of color. I mean, just a real trailblazer that way. And the other thing I always loved about him was the fact that he would take guys that couldn't put it together anywhere else. He loved the guys that were suffering or had problems or couldn't pay their debts or had drug issues or whatever. Like, he'd bring them in, and they do well.
I looked at that as that for the longest time the Raiders were the island of misfit toys.
Yeah. And the fact that Al wanted that and brought those people in, that is, for me at least, a big reason why. And I think for a lot of people that are Raider fans and are Raider people, I get the sense that for a lot of people, that's why, because it's certainly not because we've been playing great.
No, it isn't. They're looking for a new head coach. If you want to toss your hat into the ring there, this has been a really great conversation. Tara Trask, everybody here on the Last Mile Radio. That's it. We'll be back. Thanks for listening, everybody. Appreciate you. See you next time.